Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hello and welcome back to our study on Life, Death, and Meaning with Beowulf and Boethius, which is a study that I originally led for patrons in the fall of 2024. Right now we are in the Boethius section of the study, and in particular we just finished books 2 and 3 of the Constellation of Philosophy. And we've been trading off between looking at the text of the Constellation and then looking at some secondary matter, some philosophical concept or topic that plays into what Boethius is doing. This time we're going to be taking a look at Epicureanism and Stoicism. Not exhaustively, obviously, but as it's a roughly half-hour introduction to these major schools of thought. Hello and welcome back as we look at some of the philosophical roots that underlie Boethius' The Constellation of Philosophy. In fact, sometimes they do more than underlie, sometimes they present themselves explicitly on the surface. Today we're going to be taking a look at two ancient schools of thought that take us from Greece and then up to Rome, and that is Epicureanism and Stoicism. Now, odds are that you are already kind of familiar with these schools of thought. Maybe you've studied them by name, or maybe just some of the ideas will seem kind of familiar to you. They probably won't be completely foreign, completely new, but I think it'll be helpful to dig into some primary sources, at least just on a brief level, to introduce you to what these schools of thought had to say, and then you should be able to see how they present themselves through the lens that Boethius is giving us. Now, for last week's Beginning of the Week video on Neoplatonism, I might have been a little bit over-ambitious with that, in that what was supposed to be the short Beginning of the Week video actually turned out to be significantly longer than the main video on Boethius last week. And so this time, I'm going to be a bit more in the spirit of my original design for this, and this is going to be a pretty short presentation that just introduces you to the schools of thought by means of two of their leading representatives. And even then, we're only going to be looking at one representative text from each. And so for Epicureanism, all of the quotes on that section are going to come from Epicurus' letter to Menoetius, which you can find as a PDF in the course module. And then for our representative of Stoicism, we'll be pulling from Emperor Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and even that is only going to be focused on Book 2, which is the first book of really substance where he starts to explicitly unfold his philosophy. Book 1 of Meditations is mostly him showing gratitude for people in his life. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's stuff there that we can pull out, stuff we can learn about, but as far as a short presentation goes, I think it makes sense to jump right into Book 2. I was very tempted to run through the entire book, but again, I think that's going to be a little bit too much. If you want to explore these ideas further, then you can sign up for the General Intro to Philosophy course that I'll be leading at the beginning of 2025. I don't have a firm date for that at the moment, if you're watching this shortly after it's released. But if you want to dig into this and dig into more in the general gambit of the history of philosophy, then you can sign up for that course. And if you're still in the window to do so, then make sure that you use the discount that's allotted to you by being enrolled in this course. And then at some point in the future, I would love to also do a more extended study simply of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, but I can't tell you right now when that will be. But for now, let's go ahead and dig in, starting with Epicureanism. Oh, and this presentation will be fairly quote-heavy. Basically, I'm pulling out some quotes that I think do a good job of demonstrating the main ideas, and I'll just provide kind of minimal commentary this time around. Toward the beginning of his letter, Epicurus says, "Let no one when young delay to study philosophy, nor when he is old grow weary of his study. For no one can come too early or too late to secure the health of his soul. And the man who says that the age for philosophy has either not yet come or has gone by is like the man who says the age for happiness is not yet come to him or has passed away." And so right here, we see an idea that's not necessarily even unique to Epicurus, but actually is fairly common in the ancient Greek mindset, the idea that the right study of philosophy is associated with the instantiation or with the attaining of happiness, what we are meant for. This is where you get the Greek idea of eudaimonia that is very important for the likes of Aristotle. Eudaimonia being the happy life, the good life, the blessed life. It's kind of like what we are made for. And so when we live in accordance with truth and virtue for Aristotle or for Epicurus, when we live in accordance with the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain, then we start to walk into the best form of life we could possibly have. We begin to walk into wisdom. And as we walk into wisdom, we're walking into happiness, which again is something like the fulfillment of our form. It's the carrying out of our actual design, the best version of us that we could be. So that's what they mean when they talk about happiness. And that's exactly what Boethius means when he talks about happiness. It's not a matter of just fleeting, superficial, positive emotions. No, that's not what they mean by happiness. It's not even really a great word for that, because it's fleeting, it's passing away, it's a shadow. If you want a substantial idea of happiness, you need something that's enduring, something that itself is substantial, that is in fulfillment of form. So what Epicurus wants us to do is to practice the right kind of philosophy that's going to lead to true human happiness, true human flourishing. And again, he says, we must then meditate on the things that make our happiness, seeing that when that is with us, we have all, but when it is absent, we do all to win it. So we want happiness at all costs. We want to flourish. We want to live as we are ideally able to live. Now, for Epicurus, how do we go about doing that? Well, here are some indicators. So he says, become accustomed to the belief that death is nothing to us, for all good and evil consists in sensation, but death is the deprivation of sensation. So Epicurus says all good and evil consists in sensation. So the idea behind Epicureanism is that we ought to maximize pleasure, minimize pain. Well, death is the elimination of that kind of sensual experience. And so what that means is that death itself is a nothingness. It takes away our capacity for pleasure and our capacity for pain. And so once we're in the state of death, there really is no good anymore. Epicurus believes that when you die, that's it. So he's not going to stress the immortality of the soul. And so obviously Boethius is not leaning heavily on the foundations of Epicureanism, despite the fact that I do believe he has some sympathies for this tradition, as we'll see as we keep moving on. So Epicurus says, for it is to obtain this end that we always act, namely, to avoid pain and fear. And when this is once secured for us, all the tempest of the soul is dispersed, since the living creature has not to wander as though in search of something that is missing, and to look for some other thing by which he can fulfill the good of the soul and the good of the body. And so again, the good of the soul and the good of the body, according to Epicurus, is the maximization of pleasure, and the avoidance of pain, the avoidance of fear. And then he says that, for we recognize pleasure as the first good innate in us, and from pleasure we begin every act of choice and avoidance, and to pleasure we return again, using the feeling as a standard by which we judge every good. And so there is some common ground here between Boethius and Plato and Epicurus, and that all of them are going to say that the ideal for which we ought to live, that which we ought to be striving, the goal of human existence, is imprinted in our hearts. It's imprinted on our souls. We know what the good is, and we naturally follow it, or at least we naturally pursue it. However, the problem is very often we have disordered loves, so that we will elevate lesser goods above the higher goods. And so Plato says that the good is imprinted on our soul. Boethius would say that the knowledge of God is imprinted on our soul. Eternity is written on our hearts. Epicurus says that the pursuit of pleasure is written on our souls. And so part of what it means to be a good human is to recover that inner reality that we don't gain from some external source, but it's intrinsic to human experience. And so what we need to do to discover who we are meant to be is to look within and sort of follow that light or follow that coding that's written on our souls. And kind of along some of these same lines, he says that for that which gives no trouble when it comes is but an empty pain in anticipation. so death, the most terrifying of ills, is nothing to us. Since so long as we exist, death is not with us, but when death comes, we do not exist. So again, he believes that when you die, you cease to exist. So that is why Epicurus says that we don't need to fear death. And according to Epicurus, the idea of not fearing death means that, well, we really don't have anything significant to fear because, well, every fear that we have in many ways is anticipation of the fear of death. So Epicurus believes that once we rid ourselves of the fear of death, recognizing it's not an evil, it's really just a nothingness. And once we're in nothingness, we're beyond good and evil. And so because death itself is not seen as an evil, well, really nothing is seen as evil in any kind of existentially threatening sense. And so Epicurus believes that through this overcoming of death, we can now live at peace. And I should emphasize that that is really what Epicurus is striving for. When he's pursuing pleasure, he's not pursuing pleasure simply as like the stereotypical college hedonist, just go and party it up and drink and do drugs and, follow your appetites, whether it be, dietary or sexual. You simply do whatever comes your way. No, Epicurus would say no, that, yeah, you might get some short-term gains to your pleasure counter. However, in the long run, that's going to lead to a lot more pain. Physically, emotionally, psychologically. It's going to do you more harm than good. And so the kind of hedonism that Epicurus is proposing is a kind of rational hedonism, where we're going to think in the long term, what is going to maximize my pleasure across time and minimize my pain across time. And so with that in mind, he's going to prescribe a very simple life, where you don't have a lot of material concerns that you need to keep up with. You don't give yourself over to extravagant diets and, to highbrow foods and other niceties that require you to work all the time. No, what you need is a simple life with as few anxiety-producing pressures as you can possibly have. And so he wants peace. He wants serenity. And that is ultimately what he's looking for when he is pursuing pleasure. And so along those lines, he says, and since pleasure is the first good and natural to us, for this very reason we do not choose every pleasure, but sometimes we pass over many pleasures, which greater discomfort accrues to us as a result of them. And similarly, we think many pains better than pleasures, since a greater pleasure comes to us when we have endured pains for a long time. And so, again, for Epicurus, we're not going to pursue every pleasure that comes our way, because some of them are going to lead to a net pain. So, too, we do embrace some level of pain if it's likely to lead to long-term pleasure. And so, he's not somebody who says that we need to flee from all pain in life, but whenever we do embrace pain, it needs to be for a greater good. And while Boethius might differ quite a bit from Epicurus' foundations, as well as his ultimate understanding of what humans are for, there's certainly disagreement there. I certainly have disagreement with Epicurus on those grounds as well. However, I do like that he encourages us to stop and think about the way that we're living our life, because all the time we make decisions for short-term pleasure or the avoidance of short-term pain, not thinking about the long-term ramifications. And so, maybe you have an assignment or a work project, or there's something that you need to get done, but you keep pushing it off further and further. And as you keep pushing it off and the deadline comes closer and closer, your anxiety grows. Your anxiety over getting it done, your anxiety over everything that it's keeping you from doing, your anxiety over now being able to do a good job with the amount of time that you have left. Or maybe relationally, you have a conversation that you need to have with a family member or with a friend, but it's a difficult conversation. It might be a painful conversation. And so you keep putting it off further and further and further until it continues to grow into a greater and greater threat, at which point now what might have been, ripping the Band-Aid off now has become something far more significant. The reality is that the greatest threats to our souls, the greatest threats to our happiness, are not actually the ones that are present directly in front of us. The greatest threats to our happiness are the ones that are living and the ones that are brooding in the corner of our vision, right where we refuse to look. those are the ones that are most likely to do us in, the ones that we refuse to relate ourselves to. Because they are going to relate themselves to us, but it's going to manifest itself in the dis-ease of an ill-formed anxiety. And that's not good. And so whenever we're putting those kind of things off to the side, when we're intentionally not looking at the things that threaten our happiness and the happiness of those around us, we are forsaking our ultimate happiness in order to avoid short-term pain. Epicurus would say, no, if you want real happiness, then you need to do that assignment. You need to have that conversation. You need to do whatever the thing is that you are responsible for doing, that you keep putting it off. And so live by reason in order to mitigate long-term pain and maximize long-term happiness. And so even if we are going to redefine what Epicurus means by happiness, I do think that he has the potential to move us in a positive direction. He also says, and again, independence of desire, we think a great good. And so independence of desire is a great good. And that's because desire is a discomfort. It's a dis-ease with what we want over contentment versus what we have. And so we want to rid ourselves of desire so we can be content. We can experience the pleasure that we already have rather than seeking some pleasure that we think that we need. Not that we may at all times enjoy but a few things, but that if we do not possess many, we may enjoy the few in the genuine persuasion that those have the sweetest pleasure and luxury who least need it, and that all that is natural is easy to be obtained, but that which is superfluous is hard, and so plain savors bring us a pleasure equal to a luxurious diet, when all the pain due to want is removed, and bread and water produce the highest pleasure, when one who needs them puts them to his lips. And so again, it is not a bad thing to enjoy a simple life, to simply take delight in mere bread and water versus doing all the things that's required to develop and then to actually acquire the substance of a high society meal. Simply finding contentment in things that are simply found brings a greater level of pleasure, so says Epicurus. Now, he was known on occasion to splurge with a slice of cheese. That was his version of a cheat day. But for the most part, this is somebody who lived a very meager life, simply finding contentment in the simple things. And as Boethius says along these lines in Book 2 of the Consolation, the more varied your precious possessions, the more help you need to protect them. And the old saying is proved correct, he who hath much wants much. And so Boethius says something very similar to Epicurus here. And he says that we ought to strive for a simple life, that the more that we have, the more we have to stress over protecting, over maintaining. And also the more that we have, the more tempted we are to try to acquire more. And so it becomes this vicious cycle of drinking salt water to quench your thirst. And so what Epicurus would tell us, what Boethius would tell us, is that simply having a simple life, maybe you do enjoy good fortune that happens to come your way, but you don't stake your identity in those things. Your identity is found in an enduring contentment with whatever it is that you already have, whatever it is that looks like. And so we definitely see some common ground on that angle. Epicurus goes on to say, of all this, the beginning and the greatest good is prudence. Wherefore prudence is a more precious thing even than philosophy. For from prudence are sprung all the other virtues, and it teaches us that it is not possible to live pleasantly without living prudently and honorably and justly, nor again to live a life of prudence, honor, and justice without living pleasantly. For the virtues are by nature bound up with the pleasant life, and the pleasant life is inseparable from them. And so, in other words, the reward of living prudently, of not giving yourself over to excess, but in conducting yourself well appropriate to the circumstance in which you are found, this will lead to the pleasant life. And so living correctly becomes its own reward. And that's something that Boethius argues as well in Book 4 of the Consolation and elsewhere. He's already made that point before now, that doing the good thing is its own reward because, well, now you have a better relationship with the good, just as wickedness becomes its own punishment. And Augustine says something very similar when he says that a disordered mind is its own punishment. And so when we are pursuing the wrong things, when we're living chaotically, we're not living in harmony with our form, well, now we are becoming formless. We're becoming less real, less authentically ourselves. Whereas, again, if you are living according to prudence, then you will be just, and you will be living a life of honor. You will be embodying the virtues that are natural to human life. And so the good life becomes its own reward. And then toward the end of this letter, Epicurus says that he, the wise, therefore thinks it is better to be unfortunate in reasonable action than to prosper in unreason. For it is better in a man's action that what is well chosen should fail, rather than what is ill chosen should be successful owing to chance. And so Epicurus says that it's actually better to live wisely. It's better to live according to reason, yet suffer from ill fortune, than it is to live wickedly, to live foolishly, and have fortune seem to reward you. Because that's just going to cause you to double down in your folly, to make you less and less authentically human. And Boethius makes this exact point in the Consolation, and especially in Book 4 of this week. And so Epicurus and Boethius are both going to tell us that bad fortune is generally better for us than good fortune, because good fortune tends to give you a sense of approval for your life choices, whereas the best life choices are not based off circumstance. They're not based off that kind of approval from fortune's wheel, because the wheel of fortune was never meant to give you approval. Remember, Lady Fortune is blind. She isn't rewarding you necessarily because of your good deeds. Now, do our causes have effects? Sure, but still, in the most important sense, we are not in control. It doesn't matter how healthy you are. You can still get that cancer diagnosis. You can still get hit by a car. Right? It doesn't matter how responsible you are at work. Something could still happen. You can get injured where now you can no longer work, or there are layoffs and you get fired through no fault of your own. Or maybe you are a Roman senator and you get stripped of your fortune, of your prestige, of your place in society. You are thrown into prison where you're going to await your execution. These things happen, often through no direct fault of our own. And so Fortune is blind. Lady Fortune is blind. We should not be looking to her for approval. We should be looking to something eternal, and maybe even something internal, as we look inward to discover what the human form is and how we ought to live. And so definitely some strong common ground here between Epicurus and Boethius, despite the fact that they have different foundations and that they would even define happiness differently. But I think that Boethius, in drawing from the Epicurean tradition, shows us, gives us a good model for what a Christian baptism of these pagan ideas look like. That we have some glimmers of celestial strength here that just need to be brought back into their appropriate context, as Boethius does. Well, now let's take a little look here at Stoicism, given to us by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And like I said, this comes from just book 2 of his Meditations. And you should pick up and read his Meditations sometimes. Because, again, you're not going to agree with everything that he says. I hope that you don't agree with everything he says. But there is a lot of wisdom there, and the early Christians did make good use of the Stoics. Well, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, he begins book 2 saying, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine." So Stoicism focuses a lot on fate. It focuses a lot on the idea that, okay, things are going to happen. Fortune is going to spin its wheel. Now, the Stoics are going to really emphasize the fact that there is no such thing as chance, and in fact, Boethius is going to emphasize that as well. But from our perspective, things seem to happen as chance. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to fix ourselves in the big picture, the big picture of design that is necessarily embedded in the rational cosmos in which we live. And so we're not going to get swept away by emotions. We're not going to get swept away by fleeting fortune. We're not going to base ourselves in circumstance. Now, Marcus Aurelius is not going to say that everyone needs to go off and live a simple life. I mean, he's the emperor of Rome. You don't get much more extravagant than that. But at the same time, he's going to emphasize the fact that circumstance should not determine who you are. And so when fortune passes into your hand, you enjoy it. but you enjoy it with an open hand, recognizing that it may be here today, but it very well may be gone tomorrow. And so there's nothing wrong with enjoying good fortune when it comes your way, but don't enjoy it in your innermost being. Don't make it a sense of your human happiness. Don't make it an anchor for your identity. And so too, in this example, with the fact that we need to just recognize daily that we're going to encounter a lot of annoying people, maybe even some bad people. Well, that doesn't need to rile us up. That doesn't need to define who we are. It doesn't matter who we're talking to. That the ungrateful, that the jealous, the dishonest, the meddling, that the wicked, they do not need to impact your identity. They don't need to rile you up. You can maintain serenity despite the fact that there may be a storm brewing around you. And he talks about that, how that evil people really just are ignorant. They don't understand the good. And so evil here is understood in terms of understanding. They are ignorant. They simply don't know what the good is on the most significant level. And so that should inspire not our anger, not our frustration, but it should inspire our sympathy. Recognizing that these are people who they need their vision to be fixed. Just as if you see someone who's physically blind, that's not going to make you angry, right? It's going to give you pity. Well, so too in the moral sphere, in the ethical sphere. And Boethius makes this very same point in Book 4. He says, "This is why among wise men there's no place at all left for hatred. For no one except the greatest of fools would hate good men. And there's no reason at all for hating the bad. For just as weakness is a disease of the body, so wickedness is a disease of the mind. And if this is so, since we think of people who are sick in the body as deserving sympathy rather than hatred, much more so do they deserve pity rather than blame, who suffer an even more severe than any physical illness." And so Marcus Aurelius is going to say that the wicked are ignorant. Boethius is going to say that the wicked are sick. In both cases, we should have sympathy, we should have compassion, rather than anger, rather than hatred. And when you take this model, it becomes a lot easier to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you, recognizing that they are acting out of a lack, not out of a power that they have over you. They're actually acting over a powerlessness, over their own human condition. They're not living in line with what it means to be human, and that should garner sympathy within us. Now, is there a place for righteous anger? I mean, yeah, I would say that there is, but when it comes to actual people, image bearers of God, no matter how flawed they may be, well, we ought to have a degree of sympathy. We ought to want to see people come to knowledge of the truth that they can flourish as humans, right? This is why even Christ on the cross can say, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Christ himself says that the people crucifying me are acting out of ignorance, and that is how he portrays their wickedness. And because they're acting out of ignorance, Christ is able to pray for their salvation, or at least pray that this particular sin will be overlooked. And so I think that Marcus Aurelius, I think that Boethius, I think that both of them are giving us something that's very workable within the Christian tradition, especially through the teachings of Christ. Now, as I said, Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics in general are really going to focus on the fact that chance is an illusion, that there is no real such thing as chance. He says that even chance is not divorced from nature, from the inweaving and enfolding of things governed by providence. Everything proceeds from it. And then there is necessity in the needs of the whole world, of which you are a part. Whatever the nature of the whole world does, and whatever serves to maintain it, is good for every part of nature. So this idea that there is a grand design at place. A lot of times he'll talk about the God, which really is something like rationality, the logos. That's probably the best way to understand the Stoic idea of God. And so there is a reason, there's a logos that holds the entire cosmos together. And so nature operates in a rational way that eventually, when you work out the web of cause and effects, everything ends up serving the good. Providence works all things together for good, and especially for those who love goodness, those who love reason, those who love rationality. And so when something seems to turn to ill fortune for you, when a particular apparent chance seems to not work in your favor, what you as the good Stoic need to do is step back and recognize that the whole realm of nature is not about you. And so whatever this misfortune is that you are currently facing is actually working for the fortune of the entire system. And so what you need to do is separate yourself from your own subjectivity, separate yourself from your own subjective experience, and recognize that what's happening to you is something that's happening for the entire system that we might call nature. And so you can separate yourself from your present pains, recognizing that it's working for a greater good. And if your soul, your life, is in harmony with the realm of nature, then even that which does you pain is ultimately working for your good, because you are part of nature. And even if we might not want to say that's the whole story, I think that there is something good there that we can take, that we can kind of convert into our broader system of thought, as Boethius certainly does. I mean, consider the number of times that Boethius talks about this, the number of times he talks about the relation of fate and providence, the number of times he talks about the orderliness in nature, that when Boethius himself is starting to kind of go off the rails into despair, Lady Philosophy comes in and says, consider the realm of nature. Consider this grand harmonious reality of which you are a part. And so she helps him to contextualize himself within the broader sphere of nature. So too, this is what Marcus Aurelius is telling us to do. And so I think that it's pretty clear that Boethius is pulling on the Stoic tradition. Marcus Aurelius also says, do everything as if it were the last thing you were doing in your life, and stop being aimless. Stop letting your emotions override what your mind tells you. Stop being hypocritical, self-centered, irritable. You see how few things you have to do to live a satisfying and reverent life. And so Marcus Aurelius is going to have us live intentionally. There's a wrong stereotype about the Stoics, that they're simply checked out in life, just sort of letting things happen. But that's not the case. What he says is that what you do have a responsibility. Maybe you yourself are not writing out the story of fate, but what you do have a responsibility to do is to decide how you are relating to fate as it unfolds on and around and through and in you. You have a responsibility for determining how you are relating to the nature in which you find yourself. And so stop thinking everything is about you. Stop being self-centered. And if you stop being self-centered, you will probably stop being hypocritical. You'll probably stop being irritable. When you recognize that you have a responsibility to the grander context in which you find yourself, it's much easier to not focus on what everything means to you, but you can instead focus on this broader reality, this broader realm of nature in which you find yourself, and in finding the path that is laid out for you, you will find a satisfying and a reverent life, recognizing that you are not ultimate. And again, I think that we see that come out in the Boethian idea that we need to find ourselves as part of the realm of nature. And in so doing, we find a degree of contentment that keeps us existentially secure from whatever current misfortune happens to be befalling us. And again, on the same idea, nor would nature ever, through inability or incompetence, make such a mistake as to let good and bad things happen indiscriminately to good and bad alike. But death and life, success and failure, pain and pleasure, wealth and poverty, all these happen to good and bad alike, and they are neither noble nor shameful, and hence neither good nor bad. So again, Marcus Aurelius is trying to disentangle us from the wheel of fortune, recognizing that she's going to spin her wheel, and sometimes that'll bring us good fortune, sometimes it'll bring us bad fortune. But when we separate our identities, when we separate our happiness, our eudaimonia, from the wheel of fortune, and find it within ourselves in the sense of fulfilling the form that is written on our souls, when we do that, then we recognize that fortune itself is not inherently good or bad. Good or bad becomes dependent on how we are relating ourselves to fortune, to all fortune. And by the way, Kierkegaard says something very similar to this in The Concept of Anxiety. But Marcus Aurelius also says that what is divine deserves our respect because it is good. What is human deserves our affection because it is like us, and our pity too sometimes, for its inability to tell good from bad, as terrible as blindness as the kind that can't tell white from black. And so he moves to the end of Book 2 by circling back to where he began at the beginning of the book, by emphasizing the fact that we ought to keep our devotion, keep our focus on what is good, and not give undue attention to the bad that is around us. Because when people are doing wrong, when people are given over to wicked lives, well, they're actually just given over to their ignorance. And so maybe if we set our eyes on goodness, I mean, maybe that will have the effect of helping others to do likewise, to look in the direction that we are looking. However, it's very important for Stoicism that we don't do good in order to convert other people to Stoicism. We do what is good because it is good. We honor what is good because it is good. Goodness is its own reward. However, it very well may also have the effect of illuminating the ignorant around us as the light of reason penetrates our soul and then becomes a brighter light in the world around us. And so these are two systems of thought that I definitely see in the constellation of philosophy, baptized within Boethius's Christian context. And I mean, of the two, I would definitely say that Stoicism takes the weightier role. And I would definitely recommend, read the Stoics. Start with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's very user-friendly. It's easy to jump right into. I linked the edition that I have in the supplemental reading section of this course module. And I think that would be a good way to start, and I think it would be edifying to you overall. But that's where we're going to wrap it up for now. Until next time, Godspeed. All right, thank you for listening to the Mythic Mind podcast or watching over my YouTube channel. As a reminder, both of those options are available to you if you want to sit back and watch a little bit, catch the slides, catch the notes, catch the quotes, or if you want to listen on the go, you have both of those options available to you. And if you enjoy this very philosophically oriented material, then know that there is more of that on the horizon. As I mentioned, there will be an upcoming course that I call Brief History of Ideas that'll be making its way to the public arena at some point. I'm pretty backlogged on content, and so it's going to be a little bit before that makes its way to YouTube and the podcast. And a little bit further down the road, I taught a course for Tier 3 patrons called Plato, Stoicism, Until We Have Faces. And so we'll get to that in the public areas eventually. That might be a little bit further down the road. Now, if you want to get access to content much sooner, you want to be able to experience things as they happen, then become a patron over at patreon.com/mythicmind. Even just $5 a month will provide you with a special patron podcast feed that lets you listen to all 3 Mythic Mind podcasts early and ad-free in a single feed. If you become a Tier 3 patron, then you can also join in the special courses that I run. For example, right now we are in a Silmarillion study that's got a few weeks left, and so if you become a Tier 3 patron now, you can access the entire course that we've already done up to this point, as well as what remains. And then coming up later this year, I'm going to be doing a course on Kierkegaard and probably another course on Lewis. And so if you want to participate in that, become a Tier 3 patron. There's a discount for annual patronage. And so whether you want to go that route or you just want to join our Discord, join our recorded live chats for the podcast, then you can just become a Tier 1 patron over at patreon.com/mythicmind. And many thanks to all 80 of my patrons, and by name, I'd like to thank all Tier 3 patrons. So many thanks to Zach E., Zach K., Michael Kit, Andrew Aaron, Jack Adam, Zeta David, Don Ross David, Roger Justin, Amanda Chase, Kyle Tyler, Evie, Justin, Christopher, Jamie, Paul, and William. You all do so much in helping Mythic Mind continue to be what it is and continue expanding in new directions. And we're even talking behind the scenes about what some of those new directions might be as we continue to expand our portfolio of the kinds of things that we're able to discuss, the kinds of things we're able to produce, as part of our broad mission to be an active force in advancing the realm of the Christian humanities in academia as well as in pop culture, right? In the various things that we're doing. And so if you want to support us, you want to become part of what we're doing, patreon.com/mythicmind. Now, if you're listening on the freebie feeds, then the next thing to come out from Mythic Mind will be on Wednesday over on Mythic Mind Movies and Shows podcast, as well as on the YouTube channel, as we talk about the 1995 adaptation of Jane Austen's Persuasion. And then on Thursday, over on the main Mythic Mind podcast and my YouTube channel, we'll be continuing with Josh Traylor's Paradise Lost course, with Book 9 of Paradise Lost. So that's what's coming up, and I will talk to you then.